Hey, it's your pal Mike Shea from the website Sly Flourish and author of the books The Lazy Dungeon Master and Sly Flourish's Fantastic Locations. I'm going to be hosting a brand new show on the Don't Split the Podcast network called the DM's Deep Dive. Each month, I'll be talking to a member of the D&D community about a particular topic of the game like encounter design, tools for improvisation, and game pacing. You can subscribe to the show through iTunes, on Twitch, or on YouTube. Join me, and we'll all work together to make our games fantastic.
This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. This week on the show, I have two amazing game masters and 13th Age fans, and they're also people who are heavily involved in the industry. I'm talking with Liz Theis and J. Michael Bestul, and we are going to be reviewing some amazing 13th Age battle scenes books. Low Magic and High Cunning and the Crown Commands are a bunch of encounters for your 13th Age games. Just what did we think of them? Well, why don't we break into the discussion for that? Okay, everybody, now I am here with J. Michael Bestul and Liz Theis. Welcome to Tabletop Babble. Why don't we introduce ourselves to the people out there? Liz, what is your experience in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
I have a very long history with tabletop role-playing games. I've been playing them since I was, the age probably changes every time I say it. But it's probably around 5 or 6 when I first started. I had my first D&D type game with my dad. I'm positive he didn't use all the rules, but that's where I got started, and I've been playing ever since. Various games, editions, and really it was when I joined Lone Wolf Development, which is the company that creates Hero Lab and Realmarks and Army Builder, that I really started adventuring out of the more well-known games, the D&D and then the Pathfinder, and started looking at other publishers and realized, holy crap, there are some games that are just as good, if not better, in many ways than what I think many people come to know about the tabletop industries. And even though I'm no longer with that company, I'm still really heavily involved in the industry. And that's how I discovered 13th Age. So very, very thankful I had my time in the industry that I did.
Absolutely, and still a force to be reckoned with for sure. So thank you for coming on. And Jay, welcome to Tabletop Babble. This is the first time we talked. We didn't talk on my old podcast. You ran my very first 13th Age game at Gen Con, and it was awesome. It was an amazing introduction. You made me a fan. What is your experience with tabletop role-playing games?
I started tabletop role-playing games in high school. My brother and I were looking for something to do, and I was a Lovecraft fan. And so I picked up Call of Cthulhu and just ran it for me and my brother, and then started running it for more and more friends. Picked up things like Delta Green and then eventually Trail of Cthulhu, and I've been running that for those games for about 20 years as a GM, just because forced into one of us has to GM, and I found that I absolutely loved it. When I went to college, I went to grad school studying theater, and I focused my thesis and kind of a lot of my studies on performance studies, interaction, collaborative storytelling. So, in fact, my master's thesis was on the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society, kind of that blending of like Call of Cthulhu tabletop with live-action role-playing, with theater. And since then, I've been doing a lot of work around Chicago with GMing events. There's a thing here we do Will Hindmarch does every year called the Level Eater, which is an amazing charity event that's D&D, running for multiple tables that are kind of interlinked. And then occasionally I try to do a little bit of hacking of games like 13th Age and Delta Green, Call of Cthulhu, and I've done a little bit of freelance works for games like Steamscapes. And other than that, just running and GMing a lot, which is, again, where we met.
Absolutely. So it's great to have both of you here today, because we are going to talk about 13th Age, and both of you have run 13th Age games. And specifically, Tabletop Babble was asked to review these battle scenes books by Pelgrane Press. Thank you very much to Wade Rocket for setting it up, and for sending us 2 of these battle scenes books, High Magic and Low Cunning, and The Crown Commands. Every now and then, for various crunchy combat fantasy role-playing games, a book like this comes along, right? A book that's a bunch of prepared encounters that you can run. 4th edition had a book called Dungeon Delve. Kobold Press just put out a book called Prepared for 5th edition that has a lot of encounters ready to run. These are very similar to those books in that these are ready-to-run encounters that have a lot of different options for you, and they are separated into 3 books. 2 are out, there's another one coming, and each book covers encounters relating to specific icons. If you've never played 13th Age before, there's some really cool story mechanics that revolve around these 13 icons that are basically super high-level NPCs that influence the world that the characters have connections to. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, it's like, here's a group of encounters that all relate to each other, and they relate to a specific icon, like the Dwarf King, or the High Druid, or the Prince of Shadows. And then it'll say, here's another 3 or 4 encounters, and they relate to each other, and they connect to a different icon. And so, each book has a set of encounters, and there are probably, 4 or 3 sets per icon. So you're talking about quite a few encounters. 40 total in one book, which is great. So I have thoughts about this. I think that books like this done well are invaluable to game masters, especially adult game masters who have other stuff going on in their lives, like jobs or children or family or pets or whatever. But let's talk about this. Was this book done well? What did you think, Liz?
I was actually very surprised when I read through it. I've looked at many books like this before, just for other role-playing systems. And one of the problems I've always run into is that they're always very, very specific with this is, how the story is. It's presented as you have to run it this way, figure out how to work it into your story. And I always feel like I'm a little constrained, where it's harder to sort of pick it up and put it into maybe a larger campaign or a larger story. And I think the reason that these work really well is because of how 13th Age is structured. Because of the icons, it's, in my opinion, easier to take encounters, the beginning of stories like this, and just throw it into any adventure because you have those connections to those icons. So I actually really, really love these a lot more than I was anticipating, just because of my experience with previous products like this for other systems. Honestly, I'm probably going to steal some of these and adapt them to a game that I'm actually doing in another system, just because the storytelling was so great and the ideas were so creative and the monsters were unique. You might have seen something like it in another system, but some of the monsters just had really creative attacks or responses to the PCs that it's a great example of how fantastic Pelgrane Press is. I'm going to be a little gushy just to let everyone know. I had a few nitpicks here and there, but overall, definitely an A for me. And
that's one of the things that you said about monsters, right? Like, there's a whole bestiary in both of these books. So that alone makes it worth the price of admission. But I think you're right.
Oh, heck yes. You're getting so much for your money.
Mm-hmm. And you're getting, like you said, these really modular encounters that are easy to plug and play. And because they relate to these icons that are so integrated into the game, it does make them really easy to drop in. And then there are these suggestions about, like, sure, we said this one relates to the Elf Queen, but here's how you could use the High Druid or the Archmage or the Prince of Shadows with this one, right? Like, they'll show you how you can modify it, which can then also give you ideas about, like, oh, here's how I could bring it to one of the other icons that isn't listed here, which is great.
Right, and I'm gonna expand a little bit more on that, James, before you hand it over to Jay. I think as I'm still quite young, I know, but as I get older and as I get farther and farther into my MBA and I'm working full time, I really, really do value those modular adventures or encounters or what have you. And I think for a while now, I've been sort of disappointed with some of what's come out. There are a few, especially third-party publishers, that I always go to because I know it's more likely to find these types of approaches. But man, this is like hitting the nail on the head. I was very, very happy when I saw how they wrote it and how well written it was. If you don't know Pelgrane Press and the products that they make, they are high quality products. Just putting it out there right now. Go check it out. I will be surprised if anyone's disappointed.
Agreed, yeah, it is a high bar. Jay, what did you think?
I love both the books. Like Liz, I'm probably going to gush a little bit. So a lot of what Liz mentioned is also kind of how I reacted. In addition to the fact that I've run one adventure, one session from each of the books. One of them I did some prep, kind of worked into existing campaign. The other was, in a literal sense, a load of no prep. It was, we got everyone together from a group that meets only like once or twice a year. We got a few second level pre-gens. Everyone filled in their one unique things, their icon relationships, and all, like it was a con game. We did it over Google Hangouts. And it was one of those, I didn't know what I was even going to run until they, selected their icons. I'm like, all right, you all seem to have a lot of connection with Lich King, plus the Lich King, that adventurer tier adventure in Crown Commands also can touch on these other icons you guys have. All right, boom, we're running that. Yeah, and it ended up being an amazing game. As you guys are saying, it's modular and they have a lot of suggestions. So there were things in it that in the course of that game, I was able to kind of like, okay, we're going to do this. We might skip this. We might change this around. And it was, as a GM, it felt very fluid. And plus there's this beautiful little terrain/trap that's right in that first room that is really clever. Like, it's not one of those traps like, oh, you stumbled upon this, ha. It's the Lich King would be that kind of that is beautiful. So in that sense, I like it. One of the other reasons I really like it, beyond being a GM, is as someone who likes to kind of learn the canon, learn the published stuff, take it apart, reassemble it, use it for other things. As you said, there's a whole bestiary here. 2 of them. Mm-hmm. And there'll be another one when we get Fire and Faith. As Liz said, some of the reactions you see from the opponents you encounter, you're like, oh, that's fascinating. The way to use terrain, not in a overly tactical way, but if a player wants to do something cool. Or like one of the things is I was writing up, okay, if I were going to write Cyclops for the 13th Age, using the 13th Age background, what would it be? And they have one in the Dwarf King section. And I was like, okay, tweak that, how I do that. So as someone who likes to hack and likes to just take and reassemble, this has provided so much material just to dig into, pull out. I mean, as you're saying, whether it's for this system or not, you're like, oh, I'm going to pull that out. It's like a little bit of a buffet that you're just kind of going, ooh, that looks good. If I do this, there are aspects of the stories that are familiar, but they kind of turn things a little. I think Kelmore did a really good job, not just of being creative with where he takes the stories, but also how you interact with the land around you, the terrain, the NPCs that you might not be part of an encounter. All those little things were really considered and really helped the GM, I feel.
That's what I was thinking. Like, this guy, Cal Moore, who wrote these books, I want to have him on the show because I was looking through and I was like, I got to find something to complain about in this review to make people know, like, I'm not paid off by Pelgrane Press. Like Liz said, you might have a nitpick here or there, but it was like, there's so much stuff that you can take apart and use, and you can use this book in so many ways. And I was like, maybe it's organization. Like, maybe these aren't, I kind of could find a way to tie these together more. And I was like, oh no, at the end of every single section, there's a little thing that tells you how to tie it to other battle scenes, right? And then it was like, well, maybe like they're not organized by, here's a chart that not only organizes them by level, but as each new book comes out, it reorganizes all of the battle scenes adventures in order. So it'll take the ones from the previous book and say, like, here they are in level. And it's a super helpful chart. It tells you what icons they relate to and all that kind of stuff. There's monsters in here. There's traps. There's all kinds of maps. It comes with a map folio for every single encounter. So you've got 40 battle maps that you can use if you're using a virtual table, or you could print them out to use at the table, or you could just have them for reference. Like, there's so much stuff. And I could take those maps and use them in a D&D game if I wanted to. I could use them in a Pathfinder game. What do you guys think about the design of the encounters. Like, do you think that the battles themselves are original and fresh and surprising? Liz, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think the battles are what kind of stood out to me as being the unique, really unique part. I love it's a silly encounter, but the encounter with the animated objects in one of the first adventures in High Magic and Low Cunning, and the actual adventure is going to escape my mind here. Maz, that's it, Maz.
The Archmage one.
Yeah, and the animated laboratory encounter is just so fun, and I'd like to think that I would have thought of something like that. It's cute and fun, and I think would be an amusing start to a bunch of different encounters and a story. So, I mean, that's just one example, but I thought they were creative. I consider myself not necessarily the most creative person when it comes to encounters. I mean, I like to think that I present them well and I keep my players engaged, but stuff like this is stuff that I'm more than happy to steal and put into my game, because, I mean, Cal Moore, I'm now, last night I found myself looking up what else has he done, because I want more material to adapt into my own games. So I liked the encounters.
Yeah, and I'm like you. I'm like, oh man, I have to design, how am I going to make another goblin fight interesting? How am I gonna
right?
So I steal liberally from stuff like this, and he's got some really fresh original ideas. That encounter you referenced kicks off one of the books, and I was like, whoa, this is awesome. Right? This is really fun. And then the encounter after that is almost like a totally different tone too, so you've got these wacky joke encounters, and then you've got these other encounters, and there's advice in the beginning to be like, hey, here's how you could use these encounters and maybe play it a little more serious related to this icon, right? Or do that, which I thought was great. What do you think, Jay? How do you think the encounter design is?
I really like the encounter design. So going back to the Lich King one that I ran, that is an example of, sometimes you never know if your players are going to want to be more encounter heavy or more RP heavy. What happened is the players were having a lot of fun exploring their one unique things and their backgrounds with each other. So the adventure level Lich King has 4 encounters in it. And it was one of those that even after the first one, I'm kind of looking at the time, as a GM, you're looking at the pacing, you're looking at the time, and I'm thinking okay, 4 encounters might be a little much, because I know they're having fun playing with their stories and their backgrounds in the RP, even though this is essentially a dungeon dive. But essentially, the players had worked into it a secret history of the elven race, the possible creation of the original owl bears in this crypt that we decided was a corrupted elven crypt that the Lich King had taken over. So I'm looking, going, okay, this is a lot of RP we're jamming in there, which is awesome. But I don't know that we're going to get through all the encounters and make our time. So what was interesting was the second encounter, they had kind of figured themselves around the ambush. And so I allowed them to skip the encounter kind of thing. They realized, they had figured out how to get around at the ambush. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to kind of give them a chance to do this. And I goes, well, we want to know what's behind those doors now, right? So what was interesting, I created a little bit of a one-on combat with a skill challenge assist, so that they could have this almost of a mini encounter. So I was able to just adapt it there. But at the same time, it didn't take away from it. It also really fed the idea, the theme of what this dungeon was, which is a nice thing that I like at the beginning, when they don't just tell you, okay, here are the tactics, here's how the other icons you can use. They also kind of give you a sense of, okay, here's the theme and concept we were feeling for the Secret Crypt. It starts with the themes of this set of battles are death and magic, especially of the type the Lich King likes. And even if you skip an encounter, you can use it to feed that theme of corruption and death versus life. It gives you enough of a backstory and enough of a connection and a way to connect it to your players and their backstories that they could even, skip, and not skip encounter, or alter it to fit their backstory, or they do something clever to help them. And Cal mentions, he writes that each of the encounters is at least a one, in terms of building battles for 13th Age, it's a little tougher than a standard battle. and some of which he even mentions are, double strength. So encouraging players to take their backstories and their icon connections, their backgrounds, to maybe give themselves advantages narratively, which it doesn't necessarily expressly say, but it seems to say, yeah, go ahead. And again, that was with a game that I did little to no prep for. I just kind of read, skimmed the scenario, and suddenly, just because of the way the players are interacting with each other and the story, I was able to say, okay, here's the story's theme, but if they get past this and do this, so it's, as a GM, I just felt like I'd done way more prep than I had.
Yeah. Well, and it almost sounds like what you're saying is these are not just encounters. Essentially, he's created a series of adventures, right? This is a series of, you could play this in a night, and there are ways around certain encounters, and there's loot rewards, and there's 5 different hooks for every section of 3 or 4 encounters, and then there's continuations on those hooks of how you can sort of continue the story after that, which I think is great. And a variety of levels, which is really nice. You can sort of play into all that stuff. So yeah, I think these encounters are super well designed. Hey everybody, wanted to take a quick break to let you know about our sponsor for this episode, Audible.com. Audible is offering a free audiobook and a free 30-day trial of their audiobook service to listeners of Tabletop Babble. One book I think you will love is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, read by the one and only Claire Danes. Check it out. It is a great story of the future, a dystopian novel that will really get your mind going and your blood pumping. So check out The Handmaid's Tale. For your free audiobook and to start your free trial, go to audible.com/DSPN. That's audible.com/DSPN. Okay, let's get back to the show. What do you guys think about the art, both of the maps, the map folios that come with it, which are pretty awesome, and then there's a lot of scenic art as well. Liz, what are your thoughts on the art?
So for me, the art was very in keeping with the rest of the 13th Age art. That includes the map folios. So, I mean, as long as you're a fan of the art you see everywhere from 13th Age, you're going to love it. For me, I liked the maps because it gives you a sense of where Calmore or whoever was working with him thought was a good place for the monsters to start off, such that the PCs have a fighting chance. And I liked how there were times where, they said, if you want to add another monster or another pixie pod is the one I'm remembering, you can put him here. I liked him. I'm not one that usually uses maps, even for 13th Age. I know that might sound weird to some people, but for me, I prefer to do more theater of the mind or terrain type stuff, but no grids. So I wasn't really drawn to the maps myself, but that's just because of how I approached the game. I thought the art was beautiful, but then again, I like the 13th Age style.
Yeah, I think, again, if you're a 13th Age GM and you love 13th Age's art style, this book is going to appeal to you on so many levels. Jay, what about you? What did you think of the art?
What's interesting is I also tend to use theater of the mind, but I also love maps. So the one I ran, it's this fun little mix where it's like, I want to, but I don't know. When I ran the Lich King one, I just used Theater of Mind since we were doing Google Hangouts and it was just a quick no prep. When I did the 3 adventure, that was a little more prepped and planned, and again, this is a longer running campaign that I inserted into. That I used the maps for, and I enjoyed them. I really like them. I kind of like them more when I have them, whether or not I'm actually showing them players or using them. Especially if I'm focusing more on what the players are doing, it's giving me kind of a way to just look at that map and see kind of the little details they put into it and then use that to give a description. And a lot of times when, playing in the theater of the mind, a player might ask, is there this type of thing? And it may not be on the map. You go, yeah. But I felt like it gave a lot of prompts in the map, so I enjoyed looking at them and referencing them, even if I didn't necessarily put them on the table. I love the art style. I love just the graphic design. I'm a big fan of how they do layout and design in terms of type and text and their style guides. I love their use of iconography. obviously there's their special icons, and the monsters sometimes will have their monstrous icons, and just the way that is such a consistent, well-designed kind of style guide throughout all of their published material. I mean, and it's also, as someone who responds to the graphic design, and then as being a GM, I feel like my brain can make shortcuts.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of those where I know how it's laid out. I know what type of typeface, or I know, what kind of setup they're going to do with stat blocks or encounter building. So I can, even kind of shortcut. I know what my eyes are going to look for. So when you're doing low prep, it's one of those where it's pretty easy for me to go, okay. And they also explain at the beginning, here's how we lay it out. They go, here's how each adventure, and then within it, each encounter is built. And with that, I found it so simple just to be able to quick reference as I'm also engaging with players, so that I'm not kind of stuck with my face in a book or face looking only at a computer or an iPad.
Totally. I use maps a lot because I play a lot of games online, and I find that having a map helps hold your players' attention when Facebook is like literally one tab away, and I don't even know that they're drifting over there. And 13th Age, I think, is a great system because it doesn't assume a map, right? It has abstract distances, which I really, really love, and I love that you can play with Theater of the Mind. So,
Yes,
but I do
yes.
that this includes maps for that reason, and I also like, the art. There's like a really cool picture of an enormous dragon at one point checking out some dudes on a balcony, and it's pretty awesome. Like, there's some really great, inspiring art in here, stuff that you could show to your players, I think, to give them an idea too. So overall, I would say it sounds like we love this thing, right? I recommend it for sure. Before we get into was there anything people didn't like? I think we should talk briefly, and Liz, you already touched on this a little bit. Can you use this for another system, right? Like, if you're playing 13th Age and you're a game master, absolutely go buy this. You're going to have an awesome time. It's super modular. You can use it for a bunch of other stuff. What do you think about using it for another system? Maybe another fantasy RPG like Pathfinder or D&D, or if you're running in Fate or GURPS or whatever. Liz, what do you think?
I've never actually tried to convert a 13th Age monster to another system, like say D&D 5th edition or something like that. Would I try to enable in order to use some of these encounters and mini adventures? Oh, heck yes. In fact, there was one that is actually quite convenient for a campaign I'm running right now, and it's just all stuff I've made up along the way, but they're currently in a dwarven fortress. I'm trying to be quiet because my husband's around and he's playing in this game. But there was one I was like, oh, I can throw that in there. I'm making this up as I go along. I don't know what's in the rest of the fortress right now, except the ultimate goal, right? So yeah, I thoroughly intend on commandeering this for that particular 5th edition game. And I mean, if you are that type of person that loves creative writing, creative encounter building, I would encourage you to buy it, and maybe after you read it, you'll be intrigued in 13th Age, and you should be, because it's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's a great point we should make too, right? Like, 13th Age itself is a great game, so if you're interested, these books plus the core rule books is more than enough to get you started. I find that I can draw inspiration for my D&D games, and I think you will end up doing a little work, especially if you want to convert the encounters one-to-one. Yes. But you might also be able to just substitute some creatures, right? Maybe, you take some goblins, you give them a different weapon, and you're good to go in some of these encounters. So I think it all depends on, how much you want to steal and how much conversion work you have the time to do. But I do think, especially in the case of monsters and traps and things, you might have an easy time converting it, especially if you know both systems pretty well. Jay, what do you think? Would you use this to help you out with another system?
Oh, definitely. I mean, so I've done more where I've taken D&D or Pathfinder stuff and then converted to 13th Age. The question for me would be, because a lot of 13th Age is tied up in icon relationships, and sometimes the one unique things, especially the icon relationships, is like, okay, how do you model that? Can you in D&D maybe you can use advantage as a way to kind of replicate some of that. One of the interesting things I've been thinking about when you asked Liz this, and you're kind of railing off some other systems, is I actually think if you wanted to adapt this to kind of a non-D20 fantasy setting, I think that's where this would actually be something that surprisingly would adapt well, because I'm thinking of Fate or Dungeon World, where because the monster design in 13th Age is, Rob and Jonathan, they didn't want something that would take forever. They like simplicity and they like interesting responses. So, creating opponents in Fate that would have just kind of specific responses and kind of a couple aspects. Because the thing is, when they create monsters and they create encounters, the encounters here have personality. I'm looking at this when you mentioned Fate specifically going, oh, you could totally throw aspects on here so easily. Because, even every monster in here, if you're a 13th Age fan, you'll know this, always has some sort of, basically flavor text at the top of their stat block. So even if you're not even just reading the encounter has plenty of things you could aspect up. Even just that one line, that little flavor text gives you something you could play off with aspects. Some of the responses Liz was talking about, those could be interesting aspects or interesting stunts or stunts that could be used. And because I think Calmore does a really good job of utilizing terrain, and not in a way that, again, that's limiting, but in a way that players can be, big damn heroes, or monsters can be challenging. I think that you could, again, throw aspects on there, or even have that to be, relate that to moves in Dungeon World. Interestingly, if you've already done the work for a fantasy setting in like a Fate or Dungeon World, this would actually be something you could port over and play with, especially if you like kind of hacking that sort of thing. Whereas I actually think with Pathfinder and D&D, it might take a little more like, all right, well, how do I build this so the encounter is balanced? Because you're going to have things of balance. You're going to have things of, because in D&D, when you have big legendary creatures, they're going to have a couple pages of what their lair actions might be, what their legendary actions. So that might take a little more work. But of course, you could also say, well, this is a blue dragon, so let's just substitute a blue dragon from D&D. So there are ways to do it easily, where you can just take existing Pathfinder and D&D material and then just plug and play and keep the story instead. Or you could even like, all right, I want to create a blue dragon that they're not going to expect because it's going to be one that takes its inspiration from 13th Age. So I think, if you're a 13th Age GM, I think these are definitely must-haves. Like, I absolutely love these books. If you're like me with other systems and you like basically pulling influence and ideas from other things that maybe don't necessarily fit perfectly and seeing how you can, where the gaps are and how you can fill them, then this also works really well. Like, that's, I think, the secondary draw to this.
And we should say, right, these books that we're recommending, for $40, you get everything. You get the book, you get the PDF, and you get a print map folio. And then it goes down from there. You can buy just PDFs of various things. If you just want the PDF of these books, it's $20, which is totally worth it. And it's worth it to get it in print if you like having it in print. I think $40 for a book, a PDF, and a map folio is pretty awesome. The other thing is Cal Moore is clearly a huge 13th Age fan. This feels like a big love letter to the system in a lot of ways. And one of the things that I have trouble with when I run 13th Age is those icon rolls at the beginning of the session. Somebody gets an advantage, and I'm like, all right, I could give you a magic item, or I could, and then I never have another idea. And this gives me tons of ideas of ways to use them in the encounters that also then helps me understand, like, when I'm designing my own stuff in 13th Age, my own adventures, here are other ways I could, have my players use their advantage rolls on icons and stuff.
So Cal is also, he's one of the editors for Fire Opal. He does a lot of their stuff. And you'll see his name as an editor in a lot of, like, Pelgrane and Kobold stuff. He did a book called Shadows of Eldalon, one of the original adventures that they did for like a first level adventure for a wizarding school in 13th Age. And yeah, that was one of the things, like, after these came out, I went back to look at that And the way he does icon relationships in both is slightly different. I mean, he knows the system very well. But I also think that he really has a very good handle on how to mechanically play with some of these things in ways that are fun. What he had done in Shadows of Eldalon is slightly different than what he's doing in the battle scenes, partly because Shadows of Eldalon is a self-contained campaign. But it's also that looking between how he does it, how Gareth Ryder Hanrahan does it, how Ashlaw or Wade Rocket do it, or mention it in like the GM screen, it's fun to see how the different people who are obviously very well versed in the system are, working with how do you do icon relationships and how do you implement them and how do you let them affect your story. So,
yeah, I think he does have great understanding of that, which is awesome. So obviously we love this. We haven't mentioned like any glaring problems because I don't think there is anything big or glaring. Any little quibbles that you might have with this? Anything that you wish you had seen or maybe had been done differently? Liz, you mentioned you might have a couple.
So the main nitpick I had, and it's funny because you mentioned you really, really like how they do layout and everything like that. The only problems I had was here and there, I'd be reading the main text and I'd sort of be stopped and go, oh, I'm in a call out box now. Wait, where does this go now? And I'd have to sort of figure out where the continuation of the main text was. Now I was reading this in a PDF. It might be easier with the actual like hard copy book. But it was a little bit jarring for me at times. But oh my gosh, totally not a reason to not buy this book. It was just one of those minor nitpicks that sort of caught me off guard every once in a while as I was reading through the books. Very, very small. I'm still 100% behind this book, regardless of that very, very minor nitpick.
Yeah, it's super minor, but it did happen to me as well when I was reading the PDFs. I would be like, wait, what? How did I? Oh, I see what happened, and then get back on track. Again, agree, it is a super, super minor nitpick. So good job to the Pelgrane press team.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Jay? Any minor quibbles or nitpicks?
I think the only one I have is less a nitpick or quibble and more of a kind of, I want to say, warning in terms of for GMs. When you have these beautiful, well-designed maps and you have these really clever encounters, I found myself more than usual wanting to almost try to make sure that everything happened. The first time I ran, I was like, all right, got to do this encounter. Got it. And it's not that that's not what the book says to do, but it's one of those where I was tempted because you have such beautiful maps, such cool encounter ideas that sometimes you almost feel like you start to get that little bit of that railroady feel like, oh, I want you to experience this. Now, on the other hand, it's also one of those where when I acknowledge that and when, you know what, we're going to see where they go. This has given me more than I need to, and they don't need to experience everything. That's when it really opened up. So my main thing would be, even though everything in here is fun and awesome and looks great, and you'll want everyone to encounter everything, just let things happen. And wherever the players go, use the text to do that. And once you do that, it's just, and if they miss something, then you can sprinkle it in later or always go back to something. Just because it's all awesome, they don't have to encounter everything.
Yeah, that is great advice and great game master advice. I think it is very easy, especially when something is as well designed and as awesome as something like this is, to be like, but no, that they need to fight the awakened owlbear. So yeah, I would say remember that ultimately you are the one in charge if you are the game master and running the encounters. So this was an awesome book, or rather an awesome set of books. I can't wait for the third one to come out. Definitely going to check that out as well. We'll link these products in the show notes over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com, which is where you can find me and more episodes of this show. Where can people find you, Liz Theis?
Well, I'm occasionally active on Twitter at Liz Theis or at Liz Theis. It's easier to find me when you know how to spell my name, where I occasionally post about RPGs, politics, I know, and my dogs. So feel free to check me out there. And I apologize if you heard my dogs jingling collars in the background at all throughout this, but they are cute, so it's worth it.
It is. You should definitely go follow Liz on Twitter to see the dogs because they are amazing. So, and the politics and gaming are also really great. How about you?
Well, thank you.
Jay, where can people find you?
Twitter is also the best place for me. Go by the handle at -J period, all or now DASHJPERIOD. A lot of the talk there for me is about gaming. My cats, who I hope didn't end up in the background, but they may have. They have a tendency for that. As well as I'm a huge cocktail nerd, and I occasionally post to the. I have a site just -jperiod.com, which I will post different hacks or RPG ideas. It's been a little sparse. There's actually a fanzine starting up called Escalation. So that's one of those where it's like trying to figure out what to post on my site versus what I want to submit to them. So those are where you can find me.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much for coming on Tabletop Babble today.
And thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you. It was a lot of fun. Love talking 13th Age.
Woo.
Amen.
Man, that was a great review. You should definitely go check out that book. Thanks once again to Wade Rocket for setting everything up and to Pelgrane Press for providing copies of the books. You know, Tabletop Babble is still a new show, and the best way you can help us grow is to go leave us a 5-star review on your podcatching platform of choice. If your podcatching platform of choice doesn't allow to leave a review or a like or a favorite or whatever, I recommend getting an iTunes account, go and give us a great review on iTunes, and then you never need to sign into iTunes again. It helps other people find the show and is a good way to help us grow. Today's 5-star review comes all the way from Canada, and it comes from a great game designer named John Sawatsky. John Sawatsky says, "This is the standard for D&D podcasts. The show begins its run with Mike Mearls. Mike Mearls, the lead designer for the D&D brand at Wizards. I encourage everyone to listen to many podcasts about their favorite game, but if they could only listen to one, ... Now, he leaves an ellipse after that, but I think what we all know is he was going to say, if you could only listen to one, make sure it's the Dungeon Masters Block podcast. But if you could listen to 2, bring Tabletop Babble into your life as well. So thank you so much for this 5-star review, John. People, I would love to get more 5-star reviews. Help others find us. Go check it out. And if you want to support the show financially, but don't actually want to pay any money to us, that's totally fine. If you go to don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com, there are links over on the left-hand side, banners, to go to shop on DriveThruRPG and Amazon.com. You go, you use those links to shop, it throws a few pennies on the dollar our way, and it costs you nothing to do that. So go shop that way, bookmark those links once you get them, and then the next time you're buying socks and underwear on Amazon, think, hey, I'm also supporting Tabletop Babble. Alright people, Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network, thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. The music you're listening to right now was provided by Battle Bards. Remember, RPGs are like sex. As long as everybody's having fun, you're doing it right.